Værsgo.
Du sned mig rundt med det læs tømmer, du solgte mig.
Jeg snød dig, så vandet drev jeg der kører på.
Jeg vidste det godt. Men ved du hvad? Jeg har lavet et nummer med dig, som du aldrig har opdaget.
Det har jeg fortjent, elskede bror.
Cool, we are recording.
So that was Babette's feast.
So that
and
was
I'm Jaleh, and I'm
Babette's
here with
feast,
Matt
and I'm Jaleh,
chat
and I'm
about
here
it.
with
So
Matt
what did you think?
to chat
First
about it.
impressions?
So what did you think? First
Yeah,
impressions?
no, it was a really wonderful film. Very, very heartwarming, I think, by the end. To give a brief summary, this is set on the kind of wild Jutland coast in Denmark, in this very pious, very religious community. And we start off with the life of these two sisters, whose father is kind of the patriarch of this community, and these sisters have very much, they've devoted their life to him, to the church, to charity. But then Babette, a French woman who has fled France in the midst of the Civil War, who's lost her husband and her son, arrives in this community and ends up working for the sisters as a kind of live-in servant, preparing meals. And then one day, I think sort of about 14 years later, she finds out from France that she's won the lottery. And whereas the sisters think this is going to send her home, she's going to, pack her bags and leave, she decides to put all that money into this feast, both as a kind of, I think, an expression of herself, of who she really is, and also it coincides with this anniversary of the sister's father, and it creates, I think, this wonderful collision of these two cultures, these two ways of, I think, of trying to find spirituality, and it ends up with this, coinciding in this feast, which is, a really kind of wonderful scene, and obviously I think where all the kind of film's energy is leading, which I found, really, really interesting, I think, as from a structural point of view, because it almost like it mimics the arc of anticipating a meal, and then and I think you realise that although you're kind of wishing for it to arrive, actually a lot of the enjoyment is in that kind of slow building, in that slow kind of revelation towards the meal.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in the slow build up, and I think part of how they achieve that, I personally found that one of the most impressive things about that scene of them all eating the meal at the end is that it's really hard to convey one sense through another. So it's quite hard to convey taste when you only have visuals and sound. But I thought the filmmakers managed that so well, because you hear Babette preparing the food and the kind of chopping and the steam, and obviously the sipping of the glasses, clinking of the cutlery, and then you have the visuals of the incredible feast that she's prepared. But I think it's quite, if you think of it in comparison to sort of food adverts on television, which is a bit of a different kettle of fish, no pun intended, but they often don't manage to convey a really tasty piece of sort of food, whereas I think the feast absolutely managed to do that. So that's really impressive that they managed to get across the sense that it was absolutely mouth-watering and you wish that you could taste it, when actually it was often quite bizarre food, so like the weird quails and little pies and stuff like that. So I thought that was really impressive.
Comparing it to TV adverts, because I guess the deliciousness is really kind of imposed on you, it's really like thrusted upon you, whereas here there was a real kind of dramatic irony in in the way that obviously before the meal the sisters had said to the community, like, we can't sort of verbalize the fact that we're enjoying this, because it would kind of go against their very sort of pious nature, and that they should sort of restrain from kind of bodily pleasures. And so I think in that restraint, in that kind of like silence, I think as a viewer you're implicated more into the kind of like experience of eating, and I think it very much spills over into you, and as you say, I think you really do get a sense for just how delicious it is. Particularly as well, I think there's, obviously the Colonel is the only one that isn't kind of in on the secret, and it's funny because I think when he's speaking, those are the moments where actually you feel it the least, because he's kind of coming at it from a very external point of view. He's talking about the name on the bottle, or what type of champagne it is, and those aren't the things that really translate the deliciousness. It very much is in the little looks between the members at the table. But what I also thought was lovely about that scene was, I think leading up to it, there's a sense that perhaps when Babette sort of prepares this feast, there would be a kind of a decompression. There would be a sense that this community who have dedicated their whole lives to a certain kind of spirituality would sort of burst out and say, oh, isn't this a wonderfully delicious meal? But they don't. And I think that's really nice, because it upholds both ways of being. It upholds the kind of pastor's very kind of pious messaging, and it also upholds Babette's way of reaching spirituality, which is through food, and I think through community. And by the end, there is a real sense of union between everyone, where two ways of being, two ways of giving, two forms of charity are kind of integrated. And I thought that was, I don't think you kind of see that very often. It just felt very respectful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think
Absolutely. And I think one way they showed that really nicely was through the almost cross-sectional class element, because you have the general, and even though they're meant to be this Puritan community who shouldn't care about worldly hierarchies or anything, they're still pretty awed with the fact that the general has come to this dinner. And then you have him enjoying it, as you say, from sort of quite a materialistic angle, but then you also have the helpers who are essentially servants who are assisting Babette with the feast, and the coachman who comes in and she gives him kind of tidbits from the meal and stuff. So there's a nice element where the food is sort of an equalizing factor for everyone. Like it's so amazing. It's like a universal option to appreciate it. Whereas I think there are very obvious sort of stratas in their society that don't really allow that freedom in other areas. So I thought that was nice as well.
Really typified by the kind of coachman as well, that kind of sits in, who Babette treats with just as much professionalism as she would the general, and I think, or the colonel, and I think that was a lovely kind of, as you say, like equalizing thing. And then I think what's also evident is the kind of transformative kind of almost parabolic elements of the film, where by the end I think each character has transformed in some way. So Babette has found a home, sort of belonging with these sisters after a kind of tragic life that she left behind. I think that the sisters have sort of understood that the world is bigger perhaps than just what the pastor taught them. The colonel, to a sort of sense that really love is more important than success, and actually the community as well, who upon the death of the pastor were experiencing these these rifts, sort of through this meal, end up kind of mending those, and you really feel this sort of healing aspect to what Babette has given them. This person that started as a bit of an outsider has really added something to this community in the most kind of unexpected of places, you know, to bring someone from the kind of high Parisian world into this completely remote, wild coastal village, which is it's very heartwarming.
It is. It's a film with a big heart. It's hard not to kind of feel warm after watching it. And I love that. I felt like they were leaning in slightly to the national stereotypes, because you have Babette coming to this town. I mean, in the set, they have like thatched roofs and things. It looks like a medieval village. I mean, for the first couple of scenes, I was thinking, hold on, when is this meant to be set? Because they have these like coarse cloaks and everything, and fish hanging on wooden scaffolds, and you think this could be in the medieval era, but it's not. It's far later. And then you have Babette, who's sort of, in many ways, this typically cultured and quite charming French woman who comes into this village and sort of wins everyone over with how sweet and stern she is at the same time. And I think they also play into that in the first few scenes, when you see the community meeting around a central table, and it's very sparse and the interiors are very sort of dark. I thought it was a deliberate reference to, you know, those Dutch oil paintings of sort of, they're often like bankers in Amsterdam, and they have these big lace collars, but the interiors are always very stark. And I thought maybe that was again a nod to the cultural stereotypes of a very sort of Protestant background, which Babette is sort of infiltrating and bringing a bit of joy of life into. I don't know. Did you think that?
Parallel is definitely spot on. I think that, and also not just the shots of the dinner table, but when she's preparing the food, those kind of I want to say Van Eyck, but it might be Van Dyke. I always mix up the two, but the still lifes of, you know, the fruit plate. I mean, that's such a kind of like classic painterly image. I thought that those were done really, really, really well. And actually, I mean, speaking of the kind of stereotypes, I mean, I actually lived in Denmark for a year and can attest to the fact that meal times are incredibly important, more so I'd say than in our, you know, fractious Western world, where, you know, even in a professional office setting, obviously candlelit, you know, goes without saying, there we would have lunch together at midday every day, in these two tables in a kind of room in the office, and so it was very ritualistic, and I think that kind of ritual really comes across in the film. You know, and I think from our perspective, I sort of experienced it almost as a slightly imposing ritual. You know, it does feel very straight, but you get the sense it's really meaningful in these people's lives, and it gives them it gives them hope, and actually that final scene of these you know elderly people all around this kind of burning fire holding hands, it's just, you know, filled with life, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought they do that really nicely through the sort of motif of singing. I thought that was quite remarkable as well, how there's so many scenes where this quite elderly group of people are singing together, but it was quite impressive to me how different moods could be conveyed, because sometimes they sounded quite dissonant and kind of grumpy, and then by the end they sounded incredible, like a whole chorus, and they were all sort of unified together. So I thought that must have been, again, quite difficult to pull off, especially given the surrounding quite sparse visuals, to just convey that through the sound of their voices together. And I agree that, and it could very easily tip into an almost sort of cliched looking like a bit like a pagan ritual, when they're all sort of holding hands and there's a burning fire and they're all in quite some similar clothes, but actually it feels really sort of transcendent and as if they're a community who all is kind of has one heart. So yeah, that was a lovely way to finish it, I think.
Humor in it, you know, and actually in that scene as well, the guy that says sort of hallelujah, who, you know, but there's so much humor, I think, in the kind of understatement and the shock that Babette has brought this you know small town. They've never seen anything like it, and obviously I think at the end of the feast, there is a line where one of the sisters says, you know, may that meal have pleased you, which I just thought was hilarious, because they're all like, you know, you feel these kind of exaltations of joy are sort of at the tip of their tongue, but they never let themselves go there, and they show real restraint and respect, and I think that's, yeah, that in that kind of little space, I think, is where the kind of we feel that enjoyment, that these people let this life in, but they don't really, you know, they stay true, I think, to who they are and the values of the town, and that shared story is what they need, really, I think, to survive.
Absolutely, and I think
It's made even more effective because, well, in my experience, I couldn't really think of a comparable scene where you have so many elderly characters who are just having a really good time. I mean, obviously they're not verbally expressing it, but that's so unusual on screen because it's normally such a focus on kind of quite flashy visuals and youth and the sort of beauty that comes with young people. And instead to have this group of, you know, elderly, deliberately very plainly dressed, pious people who were just having the time of their lives at this dinner. I just thought that was so sweet. It's just so nice.
I don't know, did it inspire you to sort of make some of the, I mean, the meals were quite out there, I guess.
yeah, they are.
Definitely
I
not
mean,
part
the
of mine.
turtles.
They are. I mean, the turtle soup. I was quite shocked by that. And also, I mean, I was expecting to be hungry because, I mean, the title is Babette's Feast and it culminates in this incredible meal. But actually, I think it was a bit too highbrow for me. When she was making those little quail sort of boats in the pie case, I was, you know, a little bit squeamish, to be honest with you.
Blinis and quail pie for lunch. But, yeah. Okay, well, I think that's a good place to leave it. Thanks for chatting.
Cool.
Thanks for chatting.
I'll stop the recording.